And we just heard from both Senate leaders Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell about the priorities of the next Congress, including some subtle signals from McConnell about impeachment, which we were just talking about. The two men are expected to meet later this afternoon to hash out the new balance of power, as by tomorrow, Democrats will hold the White House, the Senate, and the House for the first time since 2009. That being said, it is the slimmest of majorities, which means passing legislation will be slightly more complicated. With me now is Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. Senator, thank you very much for being here. So it's a very slim majority. There's going to be a power sharing, might not be the right word. There will be a power agreement where Chuck Schumer apparently is the majority leader, according to reporting, but committees will still be split 50-50 with Democrats helming each committee. Given that, and given that you need 60 votes to pass legislation, how optimistic are you that some of these big moves are going to be able to pass through the Senate, things like $2,000 checks for individuals who need them right now?
Pretty optimistic, actually. We have two avenues that are significant. One is just regular order, as you mentioned. That requires 60 votes. But there's been a lot of stuff that has considerable bipartisan appeal that has been backed up and kept off the Senate floor by Mitch McConnell, either because it divided his caucus or because it disrupted his donors or for whatever reason. So the fact that Chuck can bring these bills to the floor and give them an airing and give the Republicans who are interested in supporting them a chance to come forward is, I think, going to open up a surprising number of avenues where we can actually get to 60 that were foreclosed by Mitch being unwilling to simply bring a bill to the floor. The other, of course, is budget reconciliation. And we have to agree on a caucus because we're going to need every vote. But the budget reconciliation process allows us to pass very major pieces of legislation with a simple 51. And with Kamala Harris presiding, we'd have that 51.
Let me ask you about this. A lot of eyes are on Senator Joe Manchin, who's a Democrat from West Virginia, although he's pretty much in the middle, if you're looking at two political sides. He went on West Virginia politics show, and he kept the door open to the higher stimulus, which we were just talking about, but also spending as much as $4 trillion on infrastructure. I know there are Republicans out there who push back on Janet Yellen today, John Thune being one of them, saying we're worried about the deficit. A $4 trillion investment in infrastructure, how appealing is that going to be to 9 other Republicans?
I don't know. I think infrastructure ends up being a very local thing, and everybody needs to see what it's going to do in their state and for their concerns. But I think the idea of there being a very big infrastructure bill is a ripe opportunity and could produce a lot of bipartisanship.
We're looking at Joe Biden's motorcade showing up at the airport. He's about to board that plane to go to Washington. Things are going to change dramatically, but the country is still very much divided. What do you want to see Congress focus on in the first few weeks in order to set this country off on a different footing than maybe it was back in 2017?
Well, I think we need to address the COVID pandemic and the economic suffering that is caused as a first priority. I think we can then do a really significant piece of infrastructure legislation. At the same time, we can be working on tax reform to see what we can get done in a bipartisan fashion, and if not, tee it up for budget reconciliation and start to frame out what a really significant climate bill would look like. And then at some point, we've got to pass H.R. 1 and S1, the cleanup government reform special interest reduction bill, which I think may very well be President Biden's greatest legacy.
Is that going to happen, given that there's a lot of financial regulations within that bill that would restrict spending on political campaigns?
Well, you know, when you force people to vote publicly on big special interest money in politics, it gets to be a pretty tough vote. I mean, you can go from the Bernie Bros to the Tea Party, and everybody hates big, dark money in politics. So Mitch's genius has been able to protect his people from that vote. If we can get a bill like that to the floor, I wouldn't be surprised if we could smoke out a bunch of Republican votes.
I have 2 more quick questions for you. One of them is on impeachment. When do you want to see the trial start?
I don't think there's any great rush. I think that part of what needs to be sorted out is how long it's going to take. Pretty much everybody knows what took place. We don't need a long and elaborate explanation of Ukraine and foreign, actors and how this all went down. And it's not clear how vigorous a defense Trump is going to put up. So it could be that this is over in a day or two, in which case the scheduling gets much easier.
And then what about what we just heard from Pete Williams reporting the breaking news that a number of National Guard troops have been dismissed from service surrounding the inauguration, not because of any specific threat, but just to keep trouble out of the way?
Yeah, I think that obviously our security teams want to be as cautious as they can after the incidents of January 6th, and I think that's probably about all that is.
I'm going to keep you, if you don't mind, because we're watching Joe Biden. We want to wait till he gets on this plane. That's the president-elect and Dr. Jill Biden. They are less than 24 hours he is less than 24 hours from being sworn in. This is such a unique moment. And right now there is still a hard grasp within much of the Republican Party on this idea that the election wasn't fair. That it was somehow fraudulent, even though that's not true. How does someone like Joe Biden, who says that anything can be done, anything can change, how does he try to penetrate that toxic echo chamber and break free from it?
Well, I think you've got to repeat, and repeat. And I also think you have to recruit more trusted voices to join you. And I think Mitch McConnell's statement today that the mob that sacked the Capitol was fed a pack of lies is a pretty good opener for more conversation about that. I think some of my Senate colleagues have been pretty straightforward about pointing out that some of their colleagues were lying to the public and to the base when they were claiming that the election was stolen. So I think that there's an opportunity to do this, but you have to really make a point of it because an enormous amount of effort by right-wing media, by right-wing politicians, and by Trump himself went into convincing a lot of people, fooling a lot of people, defrauding a lot of people into believing that this election was stolen when it was actually probably the most transparent and clear election in history.
And one of the other big priorities, you mentioned it a moment ago, is going to be on getting trust back to scientists and convincing people that climate change is something that needs to be addressed and taken seriously. Senator Whitehouse, please come back and talk to us about that. I know you have a lot of thoughts, and we definitely want to keep the focus on that in the...
At your pleasure, Katie. Thank you for having me on.
100 days to 4 years. Senator Whitehouse, thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.